I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we are on week 10 of our Elements of Writing series, and we're going to be talking about authorial intrusions and personal narratives and opinions. Now, an authorial intrusion is a literary device where the author intentionally breaks the fourth wall or breaks the narrative in order to address the reader directly. Okay, so again, it's intentional. Where if used correctly, this device can create a relationship between the author / narrator. Because remember, sometimes it's clearly the author, right? And sometimes it's clearly a narrator, not really the author. And we'll talk about how that works in a moment. And then the reader, it adds like this additional layer to the story. Okay, so in theater, they called it breaking the fourth wall, and so it's just kind of become a thing. And the reason why in theater, so if you're not familiar with the term breaking the fourth wall, the idea is that you're standing in the theater, you have a set around you on 3 sides, and the audience is in front of you, right? But actors are supposed to pretend like there's a wall there. So you know, just like in movies or whatever, they're supposed to be looking at somebody or something or whatever. If you look and pretend like it's like you turn your eyes though and you address the audience directly, now you've broken that fourth wall. The fourth wall is gone, and we are addressing the audience directly.
Oh, he seems like a nice young man.
But they're not right for each other.
Not right for each other? What do you mean they're not right for each other? Was Napoleon right for Josephine? Was Nausea right for Dramamine? Were the 80s right for the drum machine? Who's to say? Who's to say? Was ballet right for Valentine? Was polio right for the Salk vaccine? Am I sexier than Mr. Clean?
So now the person on stage is fully aware of the people out in the audience just for a moment sometimes, and then they bring it back and the fourth wall goes back up and the audience, you know, is allowed to continue on the journey. Personal narrative, on the other hand, is when you add your own thoughts or opinions about a particular subject into what you're writing. It's highly encouraged in nonfiction, and we'll get into what that actually means though. One book that does this really well, and you're familiar with the movie, and the movie does it too, but in a different way, is William Goldman's The Princess Bride. So in the movie, of course, if you've seen it, you have the grandfather talking to the kid, and so they're constantly kind of breaking the fourth wall that way, but the not addressing the reader. In the book, the author addresses the reader. Okay, and in this book, the way that it's done is through you probably can't see it. I'll pull it up really close. Italicized text. And so there is a character who is the narrator, who's then narrating, giving you information and breaking the fourth wall by telling you that they're the narrator. But it's a completely made up character. It's not William Goldman. It's some other narrative character who's breaking the fourth wall. So this one says, "Me again. Of all the cuts in this version, I feel most justified in making this one. Just as the chapters of Whaling and Moby Dick can be omitted by all but the most punishment-loving readers, so the packing scenes that Morgenstern details here are really best left alone. That's what happens for the next 56 and a half pages of The Princess Bride. Packing. I included unpacking scenes in the same category." So this character is like a writer who's like helping to tell this story that's cutting it down for you, the reader. Now, of course, there's no, you know, how many pages? 56 and a half pages missing. That's not how the book was written. Breaking the fourth wall. I love this book. In fact, I might set this aside and read it later in the day. So then we've got Ferris Buellers Day Off. I'm trying to think of other books that do it. A Series of Unfortunate Events is a big one. Constantly addressing the reader, talking to the reader, even asking for their advice sometimes. In the books, they even warn the reader not to read the book. So, hey, stay away, just so you know, you probably shouldn't read this. And then there's like a blank page, and then you turn it and like, okay, you're still here. Well, I guess you know what you're in for. You know, don't say I didn't warn you. So there's a lot of that kind of aside. Shadow Thieves by Anna Ursu does that as well. Now the problem, of course, is that if it's not done well, it can feel very clunky and ill-fitting. Doesn't feel like it belongs there. It used to happen a lot more in classical literature. So I'm sure if you've read, anything by Dickens, there's a lot of that kind of like authorial intrusion by the author as they're writing. And this is a story of how once upon a time, and just kind of very, it's a story. I know it's a story. So let's just not pretend like it's not a story and let's just move on from there. And then tone is really important for this. You must remain consistent throughout the book because of the way that you're doing it. So if you are having authorial intrusions on purpose and you're doing like a Deadpool thing in chapter 2, it better be in chapter 8, because otherwise your reader's gonna be like, what happened to our little character who's breaking the fourth wall all the time? We need those little winks at the camera, right? So what happens when it's not done well? How do we end up with accidental authorial intrusions? You might see these comments that come from an editor who's like, hey, here's an authorial intrusion. You're like, I didn't do authorial intrusion. I wasn't doing it on purpose. It wasn't purposeful. So here's a couple ways that can happen. One of them is just your research really sticks out. So scientific names for plants that your character wouldn't know, history, locations, cities, information that your characters just wouldn't be aware of. Because the authorial intrusions, of course, happen in mostly fiction. So, we writers really like to add in a lot of that research. We've done so much research. So, you're writing a book about World War II and you've done all this research about, nurses during World War II, or you've done all this research about, the Irish potato famine, and you want to get all those little facts in that you learned about along the way. But the problem is that your character's not aware of them. So let's say that your character, they don't know that there is a blight going on with the rest of the country. All they know is that in their small town, their small village, everybody's suffering. So when they get to a bigger city, they'd have to be told by another character that it's happening, and only as much as they know, right? So you can't expand beyond the world that your characters know. If your character wouldn't know the Latin word for a plant name, then you can't let that character call it by that name. That's your research showing, okay? There's also vocabulary that our characters wouldn't use. I do this one a lot. I will add in words that there's no way a 12-year-old would ever say it. Or it's clearly me, the author, talking and not the character talking. Sometimes that just takes stepping back and going, okay, what would this character actually say in the moment? Kind of put yourself in the character's head. But that's kind of an accidental authorial intrusion. Judgmental statements that are clearly the author's opinion or values or positions or personal causes or whatever. There's a caveat here because I know that we as people, what we write is a reflection on some of our values, right? If you are the kind of person who would never write a sex scene, then I'm not going to expect to see sex scenes in your book, right? Because maybe that goes against something that you don't believe in, or you don't want to write about, or you just don't think that belongs in your books. Then that makes sense, right? The problem when it comes to like this judgmentalism and the authorial intrusions, and I've talked about it before with Ready Player One, is you add in your personal opinions and they have nothing to do with the plot, the character, or anything else. So I read a book once where the character just decided to stop going to church in the book. But it didn't quite make sense why they stopped going to church in the book, other than I think the author quit going to church, because it became very clear to me that this, either they had removed an entire subplot that I didn't know about when I was editing it, or the author has some opinions about church and wanted to include that and did it very clunkily. And so what ended up happening is we had an accidental authorial intrusion and a character who this plays no role in the book or their lives or the story, and yet for some reason it's been dropped in here. I do see it a lot more when it comes to like moral beliefs and religion, personal kind of thoughts and opinions kind of just drop in there. And you have to always ask yourself, would my character care about this? Or would my character be this way? And if the answer is no, you need to take it out, right? Because that's an accidental authorial intrusion. And then finally, I think that it's also really important to be careful with our accidental authorial intrusions because we don't want to come across as didactic or preachy. It was a bit of a turnoff in Ready Player One, even though I think the book is fantastic, to have like in page 2 or 3 the character go on a tangent about atheism, and then that never plays a part in the book again. And so I kind of walked away going, great book, why did the author insert this right here? You know, and so even though I love the book, a lot of the books I own, I don't focus on that thing because they don't have those accidental authorial intrusions, and that one did. And so I walked away with 2 thoughts: good book and has an accidental authorial intrusion in it. So then we move on to personal opinions and narrative, or personal narrative. Now this happens a lot more in nonfiction, okay? Because like I said, if we do it in fiction, it comes across as a accidental authorial intrusion. But in nonfiction, when we're writing and you're writing about like capitalism or the geopolitics between China and America, what we need in there is you, the author's big idea. Okay. We need your basic thoughts. Now, that's in a nonfiction book about history or business or anything like that. Memoirs have to have your personal opinions or narratives. When is it important to have your thoughts and opinions, and what kind of thoughts and opinions should we be including in our nonfiction books? So the first one is just your big idea. You know, what is different about your book about self-help? What is your big idea? And it needs to be your big idea, not somebody else's idea. Otherwise, that just comes across as some kind of like essay that you've written about a subject, or like you're writing a news article. You know, if you're writing a news article about the geopolitics between China and America, then I expect to just have the facts and none of your personal opinions. But if you're writing a whole book and you've got some new idea that you think would help with the political power struggle between these two countries, then give us that information. Tell us what your big idea is. And then you have to kind of separate it out from like, how is this book distinctive from those other books that are written about the similar subject? Because I can guarantee you that somebody's written a book about the same subject. And so now we need your spin. Why is this different? What is your ideas, and how does it make it different from those other books, right? We also want your personal connection to this, to these stories and ideas, even in nonfiction. I would like to know when I'm reading a book sometimes, I would like to know when I'm reading a book why the author is writing about this. What is so important about this subject? What do they hope to accomplish when they write this book? Are they, is there, did they go into business and they were working, in American companies, and every time they presented an idea to partner with a Chinese company, their company shut it down because they just didn't want to deal with that power struggle there. What is going on? So, and why does this connect to you? What are the things that you've dealt with that play a part in this book, and the reason why you're writing it? Because I'll be honest, I don't want to write a self-help book by an author who doesn't have it figured out. And I don't want to read a self-help book. And I don't mean like you have to figure out everything and you have to know all things, right? But I'll be honest, I don't want to read a book by somebody who hasn't at least kind of figured it out. Do I want to read a theoretical book about how to get into startups by somebody who's never been part of a startup? No. I want to read a book by somebody who has been a part of several successful startups, has, and these are their words of wisdom as they look back and say, here's what you need to do, here's how to get out before things get too crazy, here's what you should look at for stock options, because I did it and I was successful at it. And it doesn't mean that you have to be an expert, but it would be very helpful if you're writing a nonfiction book that you at least have some kind of connection to it, and kind of have an idea of what the big idea is and how things would change and how it's already affected you. This does not mean that we need all of your personal stories and life stories. I don't need to hear about how the first time you learned, and I keep doing the China thing just because that one seems to work the best, but I don't need to hear about how you were 10 years old and you learned about China in school and it intrigued you. You know, maybe that's the truth, but really I want to hear about like how it's connected to you on a personal or professional level, especially for nonfiction. And it doesn't mean that, like, let's say you're writing a biography about you know, Thomas Jefferson. I don't expect you to have like this deep personal connection. You might just be really interested in Thomas Jefferson. But again, we still need your big idea. Why is the book you're writing different than all the other ones, right? What is it that you've learned about Thomas Jefferson that nobody else knows that you're going to include in this book? You know, otherwise, why are you writing it? You know, another book about the same subject when there's plenty of other things that are done. We need a reason, right? And so we need your personal narrative in the story and some of your personal opinions. So that's the last thing, is I need some of your personal opinions, especially about these things like, you know, startups. You know, if you're telling me that you've been a part of 5 successful startups and your opinion is that the best time to get out is before you get bored, and you say, you know, don't stick around if you're bored, move on to the next company if that's the case. That is your personal opinion, you know, be based off of your experience and your, you know, and that's great. And so that's what I want. I want that personal opinion in there because we need to know, why should we listen to you? Some things to be careful of when you are writing personal narratives, especially in memoirs and autobiographies, is using your voice to rant, unless you're writing an op-ed, and then it's okay, right, to rant a little bit. But, you know, your book shouldn't be a soapbox. I find that those books, one, the soapbox is exhausting for an entire book. It works for an article, and then you get to chapter 3 in a book, and you're like, okay, can we step off the soapbox for a moment? Because I need a break. This is all really good, you know, ranting, but where is your facts? Where is your data? Where's your information? Where's your research? Like, I need more than just your personal opinions and your rants, you know. So we need to find a balance, really. Another thing you need to be careful of is clearing your throat on the page and going, basically writing too much explanation, right? So you like set up this whole story. And then I actually read on a blog where they're talking kind of about this, and they said, you know, there's this whole story and they're telling them about how their cousin or baby brother was like really obsessed with like girls and like would walk up to mannequins and touch their boobs. And she's like, so I guess he's a breast man. And the article writer's, you know, friend said, that's where your story should start. I guess my brother's a breast man. Yeah, and you're like, yeah, that is where the story should start. Get rid of all that other exposition, or give us a little bit of the kind of backstory, and then move in and tell us the rest. So you got to be careful not to just be like, let me tell you about all these things and all of my credentials and things like that, because if you remember last week's video about hooks, we need to hook our reader and get them connected to the story, so we shouldn't do that. Also, don't overlook everyday life for lessons and life lessons that are learned. Sometimes we learn things from the mundane. So if you're writing a memoir, don't be afraid to look at kind of the everyday life things too. We don't need all of the action-packed moments of your life. Give your reader a little bit of a break. And then finally, not using dialogue. That is something that I see missing from a lot of personal narrative, is the dialogue is not there. You know, they'll say it's show don't tell, right? So they'll say like, I had a conversation with my sister. Can I see that conversation with your sister? Give us a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's expecting your memory to be 100% and that you're going to like be able to like list out exactly what was said in this conversation. Get your sister's permission to put it in the book, and then put it in the book. Give us that little bit of a dialogue so we get an idea of, you know, what happened through almost like characters, right? And that kind of creates that like it is in fiction, an almost purposeful authorial intrusion. We do want your opinions, we want your thoughts and ideas. This is your book and we want to know what's so different about it. And we just don't want it to be clunky. So that's basics for Authorial Intrusion. I do recommend you running out and grabbing a couple of more modern Authorial Intrusion books because they are really interesting and really well done. But it's not something that I think every author should do. In fact, I think these days most authors don't do Authorial Intrusions because it's so hard and it can feel a little Ferris Buellers Day Off, I think, and people are a little wary of that. Deadpool kind of played on that, right? And Deadpool's been around much longer than Ferris Bueller, but or has it? I don't actually know when the beginning of Deadpool was. Ooh, bad geek. Anyway, but I will say that it is expected that we have some kind of personal narrative in our nonfiction. Even if it's just in that author's note at the very beginning where you're telling us about your connection to the story and why you wrote this book, right? Don't forget to press like and subscribe to my channel. I post new writing tips almost every Friday. If you think you're ready to hire an editor, you can check me out at galaxy-inc.com. I've been Venus with Galaxy Inc. I hope your writing is out of this world.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.